I adjusted the mic stand just a fraction lower, the polished steel cool beneath my fingers. My reflection glimmered faintly on its surface, lipstick perfectly in place, hair pinned in a way that framed my face but didn't distract. I had been on countless stages by now, yet this moment hummed differently. Tonight, the conference hall in San Francisco was packed with executives, scholars, innovators, many of whom once dismissed me. The buzz of my phone vibrated against the silk lining of my blazer pocket. A new message flashed on the screen. Looking forward to your keynote, Madison. Hard to believe how far you've come. The name at the bottom made my stomach twist. Professor Daniels. The man who once waved me off in front of a lecture hall, telling me my ideas were idealistic ramblings. I slipped the phone back, inhaling slowly. From the stage curtain, I caught sight of the massive projection screen. My name, Dr. Madison Clark, glowed in bold letters. The same words that, years ago, would have made me blush with shame. Now, they made me smirk. Still, the sting of memory lingered. I remembered how it felt to be ignored, eyes glazed over, hands fiddling with pens, someone stifling a yawn as I spoke. That silence was louder than any heckle. But tonight, the irony was too rich. I was here as the keynote speaker, and in the glossy program stacked on every seat, I had noticed a detail that nearly made me laugh out loud. Beneath notable quotes, several of my lines had been printed. The same words they once disregarded. The same words they now carried in their pockets. It was 5 years ago, in a cramped university lecture hall in Boston, where the story really began. I was 24, finishing my master's degree, nervous but burning with conviction. The seminar was called Contemporary Leadership Models, and our assignment had been to present a short speech on the future of organizational culture. I had stayed up all night perfecting mine, scribbling notes in my grandmother's worn leather journal, the one she had given me before she passed. Inside the back cover she had written, "Your words can move mountains, Maddie. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." I carried those words like armor. When it was my turn, I stood at the front, clutching my pages. My hands shook, but I pressed on, speaking about empathy as the core of leadership, how companies would need to shift from hierarchy to humanity if they wanted to thrive. I remember the silence in that room. Not the respectful kind, but the heavy kind, like my voice had been muted the second it reached their ears. A few students whispered to each other. One guy in the back actually chuckled. And then came Professor Daniels. He leaned back in his chair, adjusted his glasses, and said, "Miss Clark, interesting ideas, but frankly, too idealistic. Corporations don't run on feelings. They run on results." The class laughed, and I felt my cheeks heat like fire. My throat tightened, my pulse throbbed in my ears. I swallowed hard and managed a stiff nod, gathering my papers with trembling fingers. But in that moment, something fierce sparked inside me. I wasn't just embarrassed. I was furious. Furious that my thoughts were brushed aside before they even had a chance to breathe. Furious that a man who had written 3 books on leadership didn't have the imagination to see what was coming. When the seminar ended, I sat alone on the steps outside, journal pressed to my chest. The pages fluttered in the wind, almost like they were urging me forward. And I made myself a promise, right there on those stone steps. One day, I whispered, they'll remember these words. One day, they won't just listen. They'll repeat them. And with that vow, I turned the sting of rejection into fuel. My grandmother's journal, creased, leather-worn, smelling faintly of her lavender perfume, became my compass. Every time I doubted myself, I opened it and remembered. Words can move mountains. That night, I decided I would build my own stage brick by brick if I had to, and I would never again let silence bury my voice. The months after that humiliating seminar were brutal. I carried the sting with me everywhere, into my job interviews, into the quiet hours of my apartment, even into the mirror where I practiced speaking with a confidence I didn't yet feel. I started working nights at a small consultancy firm in New York City. My role was hardly glamorous, research assistant compiling data into neat little binders, but I treated it like training ground. During the day, I devoured books on communication, psychology, leadership. At night, I stayed late in the empty office, standing in front of conference room glass walls, delivering speeches to rows of vacant chairs. That's when I met Linda Hayes. Linda was the senior partner at the firm, a woman in her 50s with silver streaks in her hair and the kind of presence that made entire rooms lean forward. She caught me one evening, standing in the darkened office, practicing to nobody. I froze, embarrassed. But instead of laughing, she smiled. "You've got fire," she said, setting her leather briefcase down. "Don't waste it on empty rooms. Come to my workshop Saturday. Speak to real people." And so I did. That Saturday, I found myself in a rented community center room with 10 strangers, all clutching index cards, all terrified of public speaking. Linda coached us, pushed us, refused to let us shrink. When my turn came, my voice cracked, my palms sweated, but she clapped louder than anyone. Week by week, I grew stronger. I learned pacing, tone, presence. More importantly, I learned to own silence, not fear it. The breakthrough came 2 years later, when a mid-sized tech company invited me to speak at their leadership retreat. It was only 20 executives in a conference room, but when I finished, there was no awkward silence. There was applause. Real, thundering applause. From there, doors began to open. A guest blog post turned into an article picked up by Forbes. A workshop for young entrepreneurs led to a consulting contract with a Fortune 500 company. The nights were long. I burned through coffee, sacrificed weekends, missed birthdays. I wrestled with doubt every step of the way. But every time I wanted to quit, I flipped open my grandmother's journal, traced her handwriting, and whispered, "Move mountains, Maddie. Move mountains." And still, I kept my success quiet. On social media, I shared nothing more than generic updates. Busy week. Grateful for new opportunities. My old classmates and even my family assumed I was living modestly, maybe still chasing small gigs. I let them think that, because I wasn't chasing recognition anymore. I was building something bigger. By the time I was 30, I had my own firm, Clark Strategies. Clients across industries, a growing team, and a reputation for reshaping leadership cultures. Word spread quietly through boardrooms and back channels until one day I realized something surreal. People were quoting me, not just repeating my ideas, actually reciting sentences from that very first speech, the one they had laughed at. Empathy as the core of leadership. Companies must shift from hierarchy to humanity. Those words, my words, were appearing in presentations, in articles, in podcasts. They were being repeated everywhere. Everywhere, except in front of me. That was fine. For now. Because I knew the day was coming when they'd have no choice but to face me and the words they once ignored. The conference center lobby in San Francisco gleamed like a cathedral of glass and steel. My heels clicked against the marble as I walked past banners strung from the ceiling. Future of Leadership 2030. My name was everywhere. Keynote speaker, Dr. Madison Clark. I should have felt only pride. But as I approached the registration desk, I spotted them. Faces from another life. Professor Daniels, older now, but unmistakable in his tweed jacket. A cluster of my old classmates, laughing together, holding their badges. They didn't notice me at first. Not until one of them, Ethan, the guy who chuckled in the back row the day I was humiliated, caught sight of my name on the banner overhead. His laugh stopped mid-breath. "Wait," he muttered, pointing. "That's Maddie Clark?" Professor Daniels turned, squinting, his lips parting in disbelief. For a moment, I almost pitied him. Almost. I walked past them without pausing, the silk of my blouse brushing against my blazer as I straightened my shoulders. My assistant handed me a copy of the glossy program booklet. There it was again, my quotes in bold print under notable insights. The same words Daniels once dismissed as idealistic ramblings. The irony tasted sweet. Inside the main hall, thousands of chairs faced a massive stage. Soft lights washed the room in gold. I stepped into the green room, took a sip of water, and steadied my breath. The event coordinator gave me the countdown. "You're on in 2." As I walked out under the spotlight, the audience hushed. Rows of faces turned toward me, some expectant, some skeptical, and a few familiar ones, wide-eyed with shock. I began. 5 years ago, I gave a speech in a small classroom. I spoke about empathy as the foundation of leadership, about humanity being stronger than hierarchy. And do you know what happened? I paused. Silence. Every ear leaned forward. They ignored me. They laughed. They told me my words were naive, too soft, too impossible. I let the silence hang. This time, it was mine to command. But today, I continued, voice steady. Those same words are quoted in boardrooms across America. They're printed in your program. They've been shared in articles, in conferences, in company mission statements. And I stand here, not because I was heard that day, but because I refuse to let dismissal be my ending. The applause started slowly, then thundered, rolling through the hall like a wave. From the stage, I spotted Daniels in the crowd. His hands remained frozen in his lap, his face pale. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, tugging at his tie. I clicked to the next slide, case studies from companies I had worked with, results that spoke louder than theory. Charts, testimonials, transformations. My work, undeniable, unshakable. By the end, people were on their feet. Standing ovation. Phones in the air, recording. My words, once ignored, were now the centerpiece of an international dialogue. When I exited the stage, a line had already formed backstage. CEOs, journalists, students, each eager to shake my hand. And then, inevitably, the old voices. "Madison," Daniels said, his tone soft, almost trembling. I had no idea you'd come this far." I smiled, polite but sharp. "No, Professor. You did have an idea. You just chose not to see it." He flushed crimson. Ethan muttered something about always believing in you, but the lie tasted sour even as he said it. For the first time, they weren't in control of the narrative. I was. And I realized something powerful. The real victory wasn't just that they were quoting me now. It was that I no longer needed their approval. My words had already outgrown them. After the keynote, the conference's networking lounge buzzed like a hive. Clinking glasses, clusters of suits, laughter echoing under chandeliers. I moved through the room slowly. Every handshake another reminder that I had stepped into a league they once swore I'd never enter. And then they approached. Professor Daniels first, clutching a drink as though it were a shield. "Madison," he began, his voice uneven. Well, you've done extraordinary work. I'd like to reconnect. Perhaps collaborate on a new book I'm drafting." The audacity almost made me laugh. A man who once reduced me to ramblings now wanted my name beside his. I let him finish, then tilted my head slightly. "Professor, collaboration requires respect. Until you start crediting your students instead of dismissing them, you'll keep losing voices like mine. My condition is simple: lift others the way you should have lifted me. Otherwise, I won't lend you my voice." His jaw tightened. He nodded, but the shame in his eyes said enough. Next came Ethan. His grin was too wide, his words too quick. "Maddie, sorry, Dr. Clark, I always knew you had potential." Crazy how right I was, huh? Maybe we could partner on some projects. Bring your ideas to my firm? I set my champagne flute down, steadying my gaze on him. "Ethan, back then you didn't see potential. You saw something to laugh at. If you want partnership, here's my condition. Treat women in your firm with respect. Don't talk over them. Don't dismiss them. When they speak, you listen. Earn their trust before you come looking for mine." His grin faltered. He shifted on his feet, muttering something about working on it. Others followed, old classmates, acquaintances who once sneered or rolled their eyes when I spoke. Each wanted a piece of me now, a seat at my table, a drop of my credibility to polish their own reputations. And to each, I gave conditions. Not for my benefit, for theirs. Support voices younger than yours. Stop hoarding credit. Lead with transparency, not ego. Some nodded solemnly, promising to change. Others balked, uncomfortable with the mirror I held up. But I wasn't bending. Not anymore. Linda Hayes, my mentor, found me later that evening. She raised her glass and smirked. You didn't just give them a speech, Maddie. You gave them terms. That's power. I smiled back, warmth spreading through me. Power with purpose, I said. Otherwise, it's just ego wearing a suit. The truth was, I wasn't interested in revenge. I didn't need them to kneel or beg. What I wanted was transformation. If the same people who once silenced me could now amplify others, maybe the cycle could finally break. And if they chose not to, well, then they'd stay exactly where they were when I left them, sitting in silence, while the world moved forward without them. For the first time in years, I felt no bitterness. Just clarity. I wasn't that trembling girl in a Boston lecture hall anymore. I was Madison Clark, and I was done letting others decide the value of my voice. The morning after the conference, I sat alone in my hotel room, curtains drawn wide to reveal the San Francisco skyline bathed in soft gold. My heels lay abandoned by the desk, my notes still scattered across the bed. For the first time in weeks, I exhaled, without pressure pressing back against my chest. I opened my leather-bound journal, my grandmother's journal. The pages had grown fragile with time, edges curled, faint lavender scent still lingering. I traced her handwriting with my fingertip. Your words can move mountains, Maddie. She had been right. In the silence of that room, I thought of the people who had approached me last night, some ashamed, some changed, some still too proud to admit they'd been wrong. I didn't know which ones would keep their promises, but I had seen the shift in their eyes. Seeds had been planted. Whether they grew or withered was no longer my burden to carry. What mattered was the woman I had become. I remembered the trembling girl outside that lecture hall, clutching her papers, cheeks burning with humiliation. I wanted to reach back through time, take her hands, and whisper, "Hold on. They will hear you one day. They will echo your words when the world is ready." But perhaps she already knew. Perhaps that vow I made on those stone steps was my own message sent forward through time, fuel for the woman I was destined to be. My phone buzzed with new messages, invites, offers, congratulations. Yet I didn't rush to answer. Instead, I let the silence linger. Because now, silence no longer meant dismissal. It meant space. It meant peace. I closed the journal gently and set it on the nightstand, a bookend between who I was and who I had become. Standing by the window, I looked down at the bustling city streets. People hurried to meetings, shoulders hunched, voices lost in the crowd. Somewhere among them was another young woman, clutching her notes, ready to speak, terrified no one would listen. And I knew this. My voice had already carved a path for hers. I smiled, my reflection catching faintly in the glass, steady and certain. They ignored my speech. I whispered to the city below. Now they quote me at conferences.